Okay. All right. So thank you all, friends and comrades, for coming. It's going to be a very interesting discussion because Liz has a report from our Central Committee meeting, which was held just last June, which is our kind of state of the world, state of the country, state of the movement report. So I think you all know Liz. I don't not going to take the time to introduce her. I'm just going to very briefly say we're meeting, those of us here are in Treaty 6 territory. Those in other places are in the other territories of other treaties or possibly on unceded land. And that we recognize the legitimate rights of the Indigenous peoples, and we will continue to support their struggle for self-government and informed consent and control over the resources in their own territories. And for a new nation-to-nation relationship within Canada of equality and mutual respect. And we will continue to fight for that and support that until it happens. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Liz for the report from the Central Committee.
Thank you, Naomi. Hello, comrades. It's very nice to see everybody here. I'm going to try and make a fairly brief report, given what Naomi has said about the Palestinian demonstration, and so that we can save time for discussion, because I think there may be some discussion on this report, perhaps more than is usual. So the Central Committee met on June 17th and 18th in Toronto. This was an in-person meeting, and there were really three main things that we dealt with. One was the political report, which is the main thing I'm going to speak about. The second was the final or the near final report on the policy on sexual assault and harassment, which has been sent out to all of the clubs. So I hope all of you have had a chance to look at it. And there were some amendments made by the Central Committee, and what you have is the final policy adopted, and that policy is in place until the next convention in 2025, before which there will be a review of the implementation of the policy. And so if any changes are needed in the view of the committee, there will be changes proposed at the next convention. So, and that will also obviously be open for any changes or any amendments to the policy that clubs or committees across the country want to put on the table at the convention. So what we want to do with this policy is, it's the first time we've had a policy that is specific in this case and goes beyond, or doesn't go beyond, but elaborates what is in our Constitution. And so we want to use the next 2 years as to see what is the experience, are there changes that need to be made, either to the policy or to the implementation, etc. So, and if constitutional changes are needed, those will also be put at the next convention. So that was the second thing we dealt with. And the third thing we dealt with was some changes to the policy on social media. And you will probably also have received that. At the drift, I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to spend all of our time here discussing social media. But the drift of it is that it tightens things up. And we're still learning from our experience last year prior to our last convention, and taking into account that what we want social media essentially to be used for is to take our policies and our demands of the government, etc., out to people who are listening to us, or who are willing to hear what we have to say, as opposed to taking debates outside of the party. Debates about policy or about whatever issues are really internal, and they need to take place within the context of the internal mechanisms that we have. So that means, in the first place, in the context of our clubs and committees, and not, on Twitter or or the Twitterverse or its equivalent, Facebook, etc. So comments may have questions about that. If so, send them to us, and we can, we can get back to you with whatever questions you ask. We'll get back to you. We have a social media committee that brought this report forward, and it was adopted unanimously by the committee. So have a look at it if you haven't seen it yet. You'll get it from the Central Committee. I'm not sure. I think it was sent out, but it may not have been. Okay, so on the political report then. So you will, but first of all, I should say you will get the actual report probably before next weekend. Coming out of the Central Committee, we dived right into the Central School that was just completed. It was a school for trade unionists, and Comrade Jeremy Abbott was there, and he can tell you all about it when you see him. And we're short of staff, so it is what it is, but it means that that's where all of my focus was for the last 2 weeks before the school. And so the Central Executive will be dealing with the amendments to the political report that were made by the Central Committee, mostly additions, by the way. It was a very united meeting of the Central Committee. And so we want to include that before we send it out. But Thursday is when the Central Executive meets, and I'm sure it will be finalized there, and you'll get it probably next weekend. So, and it can be sent around to all of the members, so you can all read it for yourselves. But I'll just give you some of the highlights. So the first is the new international situation, which is war. And we are getting closer and closer to the brink. And as we go forward, and this is a reflection of the crisis of imperialism. We all know that the US imperialism and also European and Japanese imperialism are losing the influence that they have had since World War II. And the major reason for this is the growth of the power and influence of China, but also of the BRICS countries and other countries that are independent, if you will. And the US is frantically trying to reestablish its hegemony around the world, to the point where they're prepared to blow up Europe. We all know about the efforts to really turn the Ukraine into just to completely destroy Ukraine with the weaponry that is being sent there by the US and by Canada. And this is also combined with the efforts to attack China through the using Australia as a launching pad for NATO. The submarines, the nuclear-powered submarines, which are to be built and launched out of Australia. This isn't new. We knew this at the time of our last Central Committee meeting. But what is new is the efforts of the US to actively create a crisis, particularly around Taiwan. And it was only a few days before the last Central Committee that there was an incident where a Canadian frigate and a US warship almost crashed into a Chinese ship, right, a warship. And if that actually happened, well, I don't know. I don't know where that would have led us. It would have been. It was obviously an extremely dangerous situation, and it shows how far imperialism, especially U.S. imperialism, is prepared to go to take the world right to the brink of war, and in order to maintain, reestablish their hegemony. and to undermine the influence of China, etc. So we have also these new agreements, the AUKUS agreement involving Australia. We have the Quad agreement involving India, and all of these are aimed to provoke war and militarism in the area of the South China Sea and the East China Sea, and in particular Taiwan. And one of the issues that makes Taiwan different from Hong Kong or the other provocations by imperialism is the fact that it's an island and it's not as attached to the Chinese mainland, although Taiwan has always been a part of China until including during the period of colonization by Britain. So these are clearly provocations aimed to lead to war, either localized war or possibly a nuclear war. So this is and you can see the similar things are happening around the DPRK, increased provocations against DPRK or North Korea by imperialism. And Canada has also increased its role. Last November, we had Canada announced a new Indo-Pacific policy, the essence of which is to flex Canada's muscles, military and political muscle in the region, in the service of US imperialism, particularly with a particular focus on China. And this is very dangerous as well. You can see that things are just building up and building up. And the chances of a war, a global war, increase as the danger of war increase. So it could be simply an accident. You know, we could have a nuclear war and have no doubts. Nuclear war would mean the destruction of the planet. There's no such thing as tactical nuclear war. And it could happen by accident because things are so close to the edge. All it would take is for a ship to hit another ship. The US ships are nuclear powered, but a lot of planes and other things are now carrying nuclear weapons. And we don't know, but it's quite likely that the US, as soon as they're able to, will equip their ships with nuclear weapons as well. We already know there are nuclear equipped subs and so forth. And this may be the next step by US imperialism. So Canada's new policy gives Canada a much more active and provocative role in imperialism's drive to war, and this is very dangerous. So how do we deal with this? Well, one of the issues that we think is very important is to link the fight for disarmament in Canada, for an independent Canadian foreign policy of peace and disarmament, is to link the issue of disarmament to the issue of the environment. We know that millions of Canadians understand, because of what's happening around us, the fires, the catastrophes in Canada, but also around the world, that the environmental issue is urgent and it's planet-wide. So we need to link these issues, the issue of peace and disarmament, with the issue of the environment, so that people will understand much better that survival of the planet has two sides to it. One is to prevent global annihilation by nuclear weapons or by a generalized conventional war, and the other to stop the destruction of the planet and by the multinational corporations and by governments committed to destroy the world with nuclear weapons and conventional weapons. So this is one way to do it. The other way to do it is to link the spending that is taking place, enormous spending around the world, but also in Canada, on weapons, on military spending, most of it targeted at this point to the war in Ukraine, which will, at the end of the day, not bring peace to Ukraine. It will bring the total destruction of Ukraine. There'll be nothing left, and could provoke That could be one of the factors that provokes a nuclear war. We know that there have almost been accidents around the nuclear plant, with the war raging around it. But now there is increasing talks of using, what they call tactical nuclear weapons. But again, there's no such thing as a tactical nuclear war. This will, as soon as somebody does something, the other side will respond. And it could be either side. And they're not going to stop and say, gee, maybe we should phone them and see if they really meant to launch that nuclear weapon. No, that's not how it works. They have seconds to decide, and they will, unfortunately, that the decision will be to launch counter weapons. So the expenditures that Canada is making started, the big increase started a couple of years ago with Freeland, who is a real war hawk. But the Liberal Party is a war hawk too, and the increases in military spending are huge, and they're part of a plan to virtually double military spending in Canada between the years of 2018 and 2026. So we're right in the middle of a huge escalation of military spending in Canada. And along with it is all the jingoism, we're helping win the war in Ukraine, hooray for Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. But as I said, this is death and destruction in Ukraine. And it's also cutting of social programs and public services, because that is where the money comes from. It comes out of healthcare, as we're all seeing now, as they're busy driving to a privatization of healthcare. It comes out of education. It comes out of culture, recreation. It comes out of job creation. And it comes out of childcare. It comes out of everything it comes out of the needs of the people across the country for as they see their living standards being driven down. This is part of the driving down of living standards, is the arms business and Canada's growing gigantic military expenditures. So bringing these two issues really home to the people of Canada is really important, so that when we talk to people about military spending, about war, about survival of the planet, these are some of the issues that need to be brought in. It's a way of helping to mobilize people in the trade union movements around jobs. There will be many more jobs in an economy that's built on peace than on an economy that's built on jobs. We also don't want our kids to be, the job for you is in the military because there are no jobs in the civilian sector. So all of this is, these are things that are not generally talked about widely because of the propaganda in the country is so heavily driven towards war, Ukraine, that people are their brains are a bit scrambled and they haven't had a chance to think about these things. So it's up to us to bring these ideas and help people to get an accurate picture of what's happening. So survival is the first thing, but also jobs and what standard of living and so forth, all this fits together, and the environment, etc. So we also discussed some specific things and new things in the international situation. So for example, the situation in Cuba. So I think everyone knows that the additional sanctions and the blockade have had a really devastating effect on living standards in Cuba. This is the current situation in Cuba is akin to the special period in the 1990s. And the US imperialism is clearly just trying to strangle the revolution with these economic stranglehold. And the intent of the sanctions and the blockade is to make the economy scream, as the US military and State Department puts it. So breaking the sanctions is very important, most immediate, and really urgent, according to the comrades in Cuba, is to end the designation of Cuba as a supporter of terrorism, state supporter of terrorism. This attack comes from the biggest state supporter of terrorism, U.S. imperialism. And we all know, and thinking people know, Cuba is a humanitarian state that exports not war and aggression, but doctors and teachers, and is the sort of the antipathy of the opposite of what U.S. imperialism does in a global sense. So efforts are being stepped up across the country by organizations like the Canadian Network on Cuba, and other Cuba Solidarity organizations to focus attention on this designation and to get the Canadian government to oppose it and to speak up against it and to defeat it. And secondly, the issue of the sanctions and the blockade on Cuba, which are in fact, having a very dangerous and difficult, creating a very dangerous and difficult situation for the people of Cuba. The Palestinian situation. Well, I don't think I have to say much about this. You're all headed out to a demonstration shortly, and you know that we are in the late stages of a genocide against the Palestinian people. There has been an upsurge in the Israeli attempts to kill the people of Palestine and to increase their settlements. And this really is genocide, comrade, no question about it. And so the world needs to be raising holy hell about this and putting a stop to it, at least convincing people in Canada, that's our job, about what is really happening to the Palestinian people, what the real role of Zionism is in Israel and the Israeli government's role, and to do everything that we can to show our solidarity with Palestine. So you're about to do that today. That's good. I'll leave it at that. On the question of Sudan, comrades probably are aware of the war in Sudan, and I won't go through the history except to say that prior to this war, there was the progressive forces in the country led by politically or ideologically led by the Communist Party of Sudan, the Sudanese Communist Party. And they had moved forward against a military dictatorship. They had a government comprised of equally of military and civilian forces. And this became an untenable situation for the European Union, which has been exploiting the resources, very rich in resources, Sudan. And so as a result of that, there are now these paramilitary groups which joined with the army to overthrow the government, the military civilian government. And the result now is that the paramilitaries and the Sudanese army are destroying the country. Essentially, that's what's happened. And many of the progressive forces in the country have been jailed. Many people have been killed, and it's really a devastating crisis situation. So the Central Committee heard from some of our Sudanese comrades who spoke to the Central Committee, and we agreed that we would do everything we could to help build up solidarity committees here in Canada. And this is something that I think that you have a very good connections with the Sudanese community in Alberta, and hopefully we will see some activities here in terms of solidarity organization as well. Canadian government is also playing its usual role with respect to Sudan, which is to say, gee, it's terrible there, and then that's it. So they interfere around the world, but they don't interfere in countries, or they don't show solidarity with countries where that solidarity is really needed. So with respect to Venezuela, a very sad situation has developed in that country, where the Maduro government, the PSUV government, has been under enormous pressure from imperialism, as we know, since the days of Chavez and the transition to away from imperialism and towards a democratic Venezuela, progressive and democratic Venezuela. So the Maduro government has been under enormous pressure by imperialism ever since, and including the capitalist forces within the country, and has made some serious concessions to local capital and to foreign imperialism, which has created big divisions within the country. And including, it has got to the point where, according to our comrades in Venezuela, the Communist Party of Venezuela, there are currently efforts by the Maduro government to make the Communist Party an illegal organization in the country. So that shows you how far things have shifted, and what a sad and a dangerous situation this is. So from our perspective, it's important for us to do everything we can to continue to put the pressure on the Canadian government to keep their noses out of Venezuela and leave the country to make its own decisions, self-determination for the people of Venezuela, and to end the pressure on the Maduro government, so that the people of Venezuela can set their own course. So we think that in that case, if the foreign international imperialism, the US imperialism, Canada, etc., keep their noses out of Venezuela, the Venezuelan people will be able to sort out this situation themselves. So sad situation, it's regrettable, but we need to maintain the solidarity movements around Venezuela that have been built up here, and not focus on the divisions in the country, but we need to know about them. And it would be a mistake for us comrades to pull back from solidarity with Venezuela because of this struggle that is ongoing inside the country. This is only something that can be solved by the people of Venezuela themselves. The international communist movement has passed resolutions, and we've signed on to them, very critical of the Maduro government for its actions. But we are still supportive of Venezuela and of the anti-imperialist struggle in general, and opposed to the attacks by imperialism on the country. So this is a tricky one, especially for our friends and allies in the peace movement. But that's the situation. We need to recognize what it is. Okay, let us move now to the issue of the global recession, which we're heading into. We just came out of one in 2020. It was actually hidden by the pandemic, but it took place at the same time. And here we are heading into another recession. So this is has been tipped off by a global struggle with imperialism. The inflation in Canada is some of it is true. It's been caused by certainly by the war in Ukraine and by military spending, which is always inflationary. And given the amount of defense spending in Canada, it's clear that that is a big factor in the inflation that we're experiencing. But it's the case in all the capitalist countries that are involved in this war. In addition, there is some issue of supply chains, but the big issue here is corporations, corporate profiteering, and seizing the opportunity to raise prices and raise extraordinary profits on the backs of working people in this country. So, and of course, the results of this are deep anger. And also because people are paying huge amounts for basic necessities. Housing has now become a cause of inflation in the country. But it's also the result of that, of this crisis is massive evictions. If you look at the figures, the number of evictions across the country has increased dramatically. The increase in housing costs are also the banks are anticipating that the people who have to renew their mortgages this year, either because they have variable mortgages that so they go up every month, that inflation goes up, or they have to renew their mortgage if they have fixed mortgages, they're preparing for a mass number of defaults. And who is it who is going to be defaulting on their mortgage? Well, it's probably in the first place many young people who scraped together everything that they could. They hit up all their relatives and friends to help them get a deposit, a down payment on their house that they bought last year or the year before. And now faced with up to $1,000 a month increase in their mortgage payment, they can't do it. And so the banks have said they've put aside, this is all of the Canadian banks, $2.7 billion to account for defaults that they are anticipating. Not that they're going to do anything to help people who are on the verge of losing their homes any more than they're going to do anything, for tenants, to help tenants. So we can see that, we're on the brink of growing crisis in the housing sector and in people's right to shelter and to a home. And this is, as I said, it's housing. The housing market has actually become a cause of inflation. The Canadian government's response to this, as all the same in all the capitalist countries, has been to blame workers for inflation. They say that the cause of inflation is greedy unions and greedy workers. But in fact, we know that it's workers responding to a huge increase in the cost of living, who are responding to inflation and trying to, if they're in unions, get collective agreements that will give them a rise in income that will allow them not to see their wages drop. So real wages have dropped significantly because of inflation. By real wages, I mean what you can buy with your paycheck. It used to be what, $100 to go and get some groceries, and now it's close to $200 for a family of four. Just ask anybody. Well, you all buy groceries, you all know. And the impact that this has on a paycheck is that suddenly your paycheck it won't buy what it used to buy. And so workers have been, the strike movement has surged in the last 2 years, I would say. And workers are asking for wage increases or demanding wage increases, but they're also demanding COLA clauses, which are cost of living allowances that will ensure that their wages will rise along with when inflation rises, the cost of living rises, their wages will also automatically rise so that their real wages will keep up with the cost of living. The government's policy is to raise interest rates. They say will cut demand, and that the problem is demand, and that means the problem is trade unions. But as a result of that, they've increased interest rates. 11 times in 15 months? No, not 11, 9 times in 15 months. Sorry. And they have announced that they will continue to raise interest rates until until inflation falls to 2%. Well, it's now over 4%. It's been over a year since they started this regimen. And what this means is things are going to get a lot harder. We're going to see more homelessness. We're going to see more poverty. We're going to see as well, because of the recession, that it is the cause. Inflation is the cause of the coming recession. We're also going to see mass unemployment. And this is part of the plan by imperialism, by capitalism, by the Trudeau government. They're supported in this by the Conservatives, obviously, the Bloc, and also by the NDP, which has very little to say about this. So the strategy here is they're attempting to discipline workers by cutting their real wages and by cutting their jobs. And in this way, to force workers to, bow down and accept lower wages and to stop struggling. So as I said, we're going to see, already we're seeing big layoffs, and there are going to be more. And they're going to continue to drive down wages with these increase in interest rates. And that's why we have launched this campaign this year against interest rates and against the high prices that are unilaterally being imposed on the public right through the pandemic. By the way, you remember the grocery prices and the increases in grocery costs right through the pandemic, when a lot of 7 million people were applying for CERB. Did that stop them? No, it didn't stop them. It encouraged them. So this has been going on for a while, and it will continue to go on because nobody's stopping them, and of course nobody's stopping them because the government is the voice of these corporations and the instrument of these corporations. That's what the Canadian government represents. And so the issue of how do we fight against this then is the main debate here. So our campaign has been very successful across the country this year. We've collected over 2,000 signatures now on petitions calling on the government to roll back interest rates, roll back prices, raise wages, and increase corporate taxes. And this is when we've been out campaigning, including when I was visiting you earlier this spring in Edmonton and Calgary. When we went out petitioning, people would say, sure, I'll sign. Where do I sign? And what else can I do? And is there a demonstration? What's happening? What's the other, that I can sign, but what else can I do? And while the petition is being sponsored formally by People's Voice, it's very clear to people that this is a campaign of the Communist Party as well. When I was in, where was it? I think it was in New Brunswick, and we were out campaigning. Somebody said, oh, this is a petition of the Communist Party. And I was getting somebody else's signature, and this woman stopped in the middle of signing when she heard the other woman saying the Communist Party. And then she said, I got to get my groceries. And she continued signing, So anti-communism is not having the same impact on this campaign. And it's because we have really hit an issue that is very important to people. People are really struggling, and nobody is raising the issues the way that we are. And more to the point, nobody is putting forward a program of action, roll back prices, roll back interest rates, raise corporate taxes, raise workers' wages that we are. And that is why we are getting the response that we are. And this seems like a good moment to say that while we're at the Central Committee, we concluded that it was a very important campaign and that it shouldn't end because the working things are getting worse, not better. And so what are we going to do next? And we decided that, we started this campaign, we launched this campaign in March, just after International Women's Day, with a march on Ottawa, as it were. We took not busloads, but carloads of people to Ottawa, and we had a press conference in the inside Parliament. And then we had a demonstration on the streets of Ottawa and on Parliament Hill, on the grounds of Ottawa, while we were inside giving our press conference. And we thought the next step should be to go back to Ottawa and do it again with more people and with thousands of petitions signed demanding that the government take these actions that we are campaigning for and we're fighting for. And so the step now then is to get out the remains of our leaflets. We know that a lot of the leaflets are already gone. In some places there are still some. So let's get them all out. This is one of the best received leaflets we've put out in a long time. So let's not let them sit in somebody's garage or in a party office. Let's get them out and collect more signatures on those petitions. We are also going to be publishing a short postcard or something equivalent to that, so that comrades will have something to hand out as well once the big leaflets are out. When they go to collect signatures, people sign because of the demands. So it's important that we have literature to give them, to tell them this is what it's about. This is what we are fighting for. So we want to send you some of these postcards. They're not worked. We haven't worked on them as yet, but that's the agenda this coming week. And we want the comrades across the country to use the summer to collect as many signatures as possible. If we had 5,000 signatures that we could take to Ottawa, or 10,000, but let's aim for 5. We think we could get these presented in Parliament. If we can find an MP who would be willing to do that, and we'll find out how close to the issue our friends in the NDP and in the Green Party are when we ask them, will you present this in Parliament? But if they don't, we'll take them to Parliament anyway and make as big a fuss as we can. So we need to get lots of signatures, because it's the number of signatures that we have it's what will have the impact, certainly with the media, as well as with parliamentarians and hopefully Parliament itself. So that's what we would like you to also be working on over the summer. We all know everybody needs holidays in the summer, so nobody's saying don't take your holidays, but you're not going to take 2 months holidays, comrades. And so please get organized and collect as many signatures as you can. This will make a big difference in the certainly in the fight back, when people can see we're the only people who are out there, and people see that, and it gives them an impression of the Communist Party that, who are we? We're a working class political party that's fighting on these issues. We're not sitting on our duffs in Parliament with very little or even nothing to say about it. So this is important. Let's see, what else? A quick word, what's the time doing here? Okay, a quick word about the whole issue of foreign interference in Canadian elections. This is part of this, as everyone knows, I'm sure, it's part of this mass campaign of anti-communism and disinformation, and it's being driven by the Conservative Party, hand in hand with the security forces in this country, CSIS in the first place. And there is, you should know, I'm sure you do know, that there's absolutely no evidence of any kind of foreign interference in either of the last 2 elections or any of the elections before that. This is something that is it's a cook job. They're cooking it up in order to convince people that there's something wrong with the Liberal government, that the current minority government is not legitimate, etc. And why are they doing that? Because the Tories want to get rid of this minority government. They want an election. They think they can form a majority or even a minority Tory government, and that's what's behind this. And that would mean a significant shift to the right, farther right than we already are, because the Liberals have taken us pretty far to the right on military spending, on the economy, on privatization of social programs and Medicare in the first place. But these guys, the Tories, will go even further to the right. And the evidence for that is, well, listen to Mr. Poilievre when he speaks and what he really thinks about things and what the Tories are prepared to do. the attack on social rights, the attack on unions. And the best quote there is from the previous Tory leader, who said that when they started this campaign, that the Conservatives are the friends of workers, but he added, not unions. So that tells you everything you need to know about this government. It is very anti-working class. It is anti-democratic, not this government, sorry, this party. And it is linked to very far right organizations in Canada. And we saw that during the truckers campaign in Ottawa and across the country last year. And when we saw Poilievre and other Tory cabinet ministers and big wigs, and also the quote unquote People's Party, Bernier and company, all out there glad handing with these people who represented very far right and were very far right forces in Canada, supported by some big money from the US as well as from right-wing forces in Canada. So this is what this is really about. What we said at the time, we sent out a statement, and we think this is the case with respect to the role of the security forces. And 50 years ago now, there was the Macdonald Commission on RCMP wrongdoing. Some of you may remember that. And this was because the RCMP, which were the security forces in the country, the state security forces before CSIS was formed, were involved in all kinds of dirty tricks. It was called dirty tricks and wrongdoing. This included spying, illegal spying on organizations, trade unions, Indigenous people. They burnt down a barn in Quebec. They were caught spying on and interfering in the affairs of CUPW, the Postal Workers Union. Which you may recall, some of you, was instrumental in bringing maternity leave to Canada. So all of this stuff, and spying on our party as well, the eavesdropping, and there was the famous incident where when we had our offices on Cecil Street, before the new building was built, we were in an old, very big house. And that was the bedrooms were the offices of various commoners who worked there, etc. And one morning, Alf Dewhurst, who some of you may remember, went into his office, and there was something hanging out of the ceiling over his desk. So he looked at it, and he gave it a little pull, and sure enough, the cord went all around the room, because there was another desk in there, out the hall, into the next office, around the room, out the hall, and every place, every room in that house had this. It was a listening device, including the office where I was working at the time. So we decided to call a press conference. When I say we, I mean the executive, the central executive, decided to call a press conference. And about this illegal listening device. This was illegal what they had done. And the icing on the cake was, in the middle of the press conference, the RCMP showed up and demanded the return of their property. So, how ridiculous does it get, Well, that was funny, but as we all know, these guys do very dangerous things. And it was the result of all that made the Macdonald Commission conclude that the RCMP was not fit, it couldn't be reformed, and the things they were doing were very dangerous. And so what happened was they proposed, and the government agreed, that the RCMP should no longer be responsible for state security for international security. Security services, sorry, not security, security services. And it was as a result of that, the Macdonald Commission, that we now have CSIS, which was supposed to have clean hands and follow the law, etc. And also the CSE, the Canadian Security Establishment, and other security services, most of which are pretty low key. A lot of people don't know they even exist. And what has happened, as we can see, and this is what we said, in our press release over this issue was that these guys are no different from from the RCMP and what they did, 50 years ago. These guys are doing today, but with much more sophisticated equipment and acts and so on. And we said the CSIS has really strayed far out of its lane. It is involved illegally in Canadian politics. That's what's happening. It's not anything about security. It's about their efforts to help the Conservatives to form a government and dump the Liberals. And this is dangerous stuff. It is really dangerous stuff. And of course, it's also intended to frighten people about, China, Russia, and so on, communists and radicals and illegal strikes and so forth. So just be aware, that's what's behind all of this. This is the real danger here. Okay, now I'm just flipping through this. A word about the fight for Medicare. So I think everybody knows that the federal government, when faced with legislation in Ontario, which allowed for a two-tier system of healthcare, we now have a private system of healthcare competing with Medicare, publicly funded care in Ontario. When asked about it, Trudeau said, he didn't say, hey, this is illegal. We have Medicare, a single payer system. And, the Canada Health Act says that there can be no private healthcare in Canada. There's only Medicare. Instead of saying this is illegal and taking action, he said, innovative. So we can see, the role of the Canadian state here. The ruling class has decided now is the time to privatize social services, and they're going to start with Medicare. And how did they do this? Well, this is a collusion over decades between federal and provincial, right-wing provincial governments, because you look across the country, and with the sole exception of BC, and it's no great revolutionary place there, trust me, you all know that. It's pretty right-wing too. It's pretty right-wing NDP government. But across the country, we have very right-wing provincial governments, and all of them working with the federal Liberal government have contributed to the privatization of healthcare. And the federal government its part has been to decrease consistently and over a long period the funding of Medicare, of hospitals and healthcare systems across the country, creating the basis for a crisis where, as we all know, nurses and healthcare workers have been screaming right through the pandemic and continue now about the fact that they are overworked, that they can't keep up with it, with the patient loads, etc. We have hospitals, public hospitals, where wards and beds are closed, despite the emergency rooms being full of people who are waiting for sometimes days in order to get seen. And they can't get beds for them because they don't have the staff that they need. And why don't they? Because they don't have the funding that they need. And provincial governments have gone along with this because they want to see privatization of healthcare. And how did they sell the public on this? Because remember, it's not long ago that federal governments were required to commit that Medicare was a sacred trust, that they would never privatize it. And now the public is accepting it. Not all of the public, by the way. But how did they do it? They said, okay, your relative is sick. You can't see a doctor. There are no doctors available. So we're going to let you go to a private practitioner and you pay with your health card. You don't have to come up with any cash. You just give them your health card, which means that the public treasury is going to be paying for privatization of healthcare. And so people who are desperate for care say, okay, well, I love my mother. I'm worried about my child. I can't stand by while my child can't get care. I have to do something. So these despicable people have created a situation where people are, I need health care. I have to do it. But, you know, there's also a huge fight back across the country on this privatization through the Canadian Health Coalition, and in particular, especially the Ontario Health Coalition. There's a similar bill has been passed in Quebec, allowing Quebec to do the same things. And so we're at that juncture where mass action around healthcare and defense of Medicare is very important. We've only had Medicare in this country since the 1960s, the late 1960s. And these guys have been waiting like vultures to privatize it, source of big money, because everybody needs healthcare at some time, just like pharmacare. You know, we need to get more involved to the extent that we're able, comrades. I know we're being called on to do all kinds of things. It's because of the crisis of capitalism. They're moving, they're on the offensive on a whole range of issues here. And we need to, with our small forces, do everything that we can to, you know, to be involved in as many of them as we can in an effective way. And this is one of the key ones. In the terms of the fight against privatization, right now it's healthcare, and that's where we need to focus. Okay, so we want to see healthcare expanded, well-funded and expanded, so it includes pharmacare, vision care, long-term care, where so many people died in private long-term care facilities during the pandemic. What did I say? Pharmacare, long-term care, vision care, mental health care. These are the key areas where we want to see healthcare expanded. Okay, the $10 a day childcare. Well, this is, you know, the big promise of universal childcare, which is, again, it's about privatization. And in this case, it's the, instead of building a system of childcare centers and training childcare workers and paying them properly and making enough spaces so that children across the country and their families have access to affordable childcare, which in this case is $10 a day, although we've demanded or called for it to be free. It's not there. And the reason it's not there is because they have invited private, what they've done is they've invited private for-profit childcare centers, public ones, usually they're the municipally funded ones, and some cooperatives. That's the new childcare system. And they've said, okay, you can opt in or you can opt out. And a lot of the private ones, at least in Ontario, have opted out. And as a result, there are far, far fewer spaces available. They're all snapped up right away. Why? Because they're $10 a day. And so lots of families, including my daughter, who's having a baby in 2 weeks, you need a childcare space. Well, good luck, because the chances are under this really poverty-stricken childcare system promised by the Liberals is just not there. It's available for the lucky few, but not for the many. So we continue to demand that, you know, the 1991 Liberal promise to introduce a universal childcare system, that's what needs to be implemented. And for women, and for families, not only women, this is a key issue still today. So now we come to the issue of jobs, and we've seen that we know that free trade, you know, eliminated many jobs in manufacturing and secondary industry, leaving Canada largely with some social programs, and of course our old faithful mining, oil and gas. That's the main industries here, plus farming, etc. Yes, of course there are some secondary industries, but not much. And that's how it is that the oil and gas companies and mining companies have made these enormous profits, and why it is difficult to transition to a green economy. It's because of the fact that there are so few jobs available, and workers are not protected in any of these transitions. And so we call for nationalization of energy and the resource industry, which means the oil and gas companies, as well as all the mining companies, which are the big obstacles to transition to a green economy and to closing the tar sands, for example, which is a big piece of that. Not the only piece, but a big piece. And the Canadian government, which focuses solely on carbon emissions, which is completely inadequate to the situation, speaks for these big companies. So they're not about to nationalize them. But that is really the key, because it's these companies which are the elephant in the room, the ones who are actively opposing every step of the way any shift that would affect their profits. So they're quite prepared to accept some carbon emissions, which they don't even pay the carbon emissions. They don't even do the actual reductions. And people who are familiar with how these corporations fudge the books and twist figures and so on, you can see that they don't even do the minimum that's required by federal and provincial governments. So by nationalizing these corporations, we then have cleared away the biggest obstacle to change, and a government that is really interested in the environment and in jobs, etc., can move decisively in that situation to transition to renewable energy, to protect workers who will be caught in the transition, people who are currently working in the oil and gas industry or in mining in areas that we want to close. They would have their jobs and wages guaranteed and could go to work in the very labor-intensive renewable sector. So, and these companies, by the way, are some of the biggest supporters of the far right around Poilievre, etc. Who is financing these guys? Who's supporting them? Who's pushing them? Well, it's the oil and gas companies. That's why they call Alberta, or Calgary anyway, Texas North, because well, I'm sure you comrades know about this better than I do. So I'll leave it at that. On secondary industry and manufacturing, auto remains the key sector, which still exists in Canada. And what they are doing, if you've been following this, is since 2001, and the declaration that the Auto Pact, which guaranteed that cars that are produced in Canada or sold in Canada had to be made in Canada. So that was the guarantee of Canadian jobs. That was declared by the World Trade Organization, I think, to be illegal. So since then, the bottom has kind of fallen out underneath the auto workers, and these companies can continue to, and as they have, say, well, if you don't take concessions, if you don't like the wages we're offering, we'll move the plants. And they've done it in many instances. On the other hand, labor in Canada is more expensive than it is anywhere else in North America, because of the strength of the Auto Workers Union and the strength of unions in Canada as well, relative to their strength in the US or Mexico. This is a huge issue, not only for auto workers in the auto sector, but because it's such an important player in the Canadian economy, it affects everything in Canada too, the Canadian economy. We would lose, tens of thousands of jobs in assembly and in parts if we didn't have this area. Now, we would argue, okay, it's not cars that we need to produce. We can produce an electric car, a small system, environmentally sustainable electric car for domestic use and for export. But we also need to be looking at the better part of the industry needs to be producing subways and urban transportation, buses and subways, and also inter-urban train services. If you want to, I can tell you that in Ontario, if you want to go from St. Catharines to Windsor, you first have to go through Toronto, which is going north instead of south. Where's the logic to that? Well, this is the influence of the auto companies who did away with trains, over the decades, and who don't want to see trains built now because it will interfere with their profits. But of course, that's what we want to see. That's important for accessible transportation for people who live in this country, working people. It is also important for the environment. And so that's what we need to do in Canada, is to build up an industry which produces transportation that is environmentally sustainable and that is useful to working people trying to get from A to B. And as we all know, with the loss of Greyhound, this has really created big problems for people living in rural and northern parts of the country. And they don't give a damn. Serving people is not their business. It's all about making money, and that's it. So the latest situation with the Volkswagen and Stellantis corporations is to force literally billions of dollars in payouts from the Canadian public purse, from the Canadian government and Ontario governments, which are luring them to produce in Canada. And these companies have said, well, we can build these new battery plants for electric cars. We can go to the States, and they're going to give us deals left, right, and center. And this is the Biden administration's, Inflation Reduction Act, I think is the name of it, which provides enormous benefits to companies that will set up in the Rust Belt states and in the US somewhere. And these companies, we want them to set up in Canada to provide jobs for Canadians. And so we are essentially the Canadian and provincial governments are buying the jobs. And who's paying for them? We are. So instead of those funds going into healthcare, education, and so on, they're going to Volkswagen and to Stellantis, which is another name for Chrysler, the big three, right? So we oppose this, and we say public ownership of this industry. If they don't want to produce in Canada, and they don't want to produce what we think is necessary to be produced in Canada, we call it, it's time to nationalize them and retool production so that we can produce vehicles other than cars. Let's see. So, oh dear, I'm going way over time here. Okay. Well, I just want to reiterate then on the fight back that we are seeing a huge upsurge in the strike movement and in protest movement. And it's obvious why. It's because people are facing huge drops in their living standards, growing unemployment, and no access to education that doesn't involve huge debts, privatization of Medicare. Everything's going to pot. And people are angry and they're fighting back. And this is very welcome because we've just come through almost 40 years of a very quiet trade union movement. So life is pushing them into action. But, you know, what is missing here is in the leadership of the trade union movement, we still have right-wing social democrats for the most part, whose view is still labor peace. And let's make a deal. And this is called business unionism and class collaboration. We were at the CLC convention last month, and the most militant statements from the leadership, the new president, B. Brusk, was her opening remarks to the convention, where she said, no kidding, this is hard to believe, but anyway, she says, "Are you ready to kick ass for the working class?" And this went back and forth between her and the delegates, and it was like, what is she saying? Where's the plan here? Well, there was no plan. We had 5 days of debates. We were there for the whole thing. And delegate after delegate said, you know, the motions that we're being asked to pass are all about lobbying government. This doesn't fit with kicking ass, right? And you can see that what happened there was that workers were looking for an actual plan in a very serious situation that is hurting a lot of people, and it wasn't there. So we can anticipate that this desire for a plan for leadership and for a coordinated struggle across the country is going to increase. Why? Because things are going to get rougher, a lot rougher, and real soon. And so for us, we are really focusing on our work and the labor movement. We know that the problem here is the leadership. Workers in the main, not all of them, but in the main, they're quite willing to struggle. They're forced into struggle because of the conditions that they're facing. It's not only the strike movement, it's also lockouts that are increasing. So our focus has to be on getting to the picket lines, on helping to support strikes, workers in motion and in action. Also, the move, which we are seeing increasing, is organizing the unorganized and the unemployed. This is going to come up too, and quick. So we need to be expanding our work on the economic frontier and helping people to understand what is the source of the problem here, what needs to be done inside the labor movement in terms of changing the direction, so that we get more action out of the trade union leadership and less efforts around the issue of class peace, which is what unfortunately the CLC leadership continues to be all about. It's not only the labor movement, but women are also fighting back on the issues of maternity leave, on the issues of childcare, the dangerous situation in the US with the attack on abortion rights, reproductive rights, which could easily come into Canada, as women know. The particular attacks currently in the US and in Canada on LGBTQ rights, and especially on trans rights, and the need to defend, to oppose these attacks and to defend the civil and democratic rights and equality rights of LGBTIQ people. I should say 2S LGBTIQ. That's the whole reference. Indigenous people continuing to struggle for their land rights against mining companies and other companies that are infringing on their land and on their rights. Farmers are struggling with bank loans. You might have seen the thing coming out of the National Farmers Union about a month ago, might have been 2 months ago, showing that while the price of bread has gone like this, what farmers are getting for wheat has gone like this over the years. They're not making a nickel more than they made 20 years ago. But these producers, like what is it, Weston Bakeries. These are the people who own Loblaws, or who used to own Loblaws, the Weston family. Their profits have just, well, everybody knows. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So, and youth are struggling, and we hope they'll struggle more because they have these enormous debts, or facing unemployment, or unpaid labor, all kinds of issues there. So now a quick word about the party, and then I'll stop. So as I said, our campaign, we want to extend it through the summer, and then in the fall we'll see how things shape up in the fall. And we'll probably continue to campaign on these issues because they're essential to people's well-being. But at this moment, we're focused on getting our literature out, including some new literature, and getting as many signatures on those petitions as we can. A word about and all of the other things that I've spoken about, the peace movement, the fight against privatization, and so forth. Well, I think you know what to do, comrades. So quick word about the party. So we continue to be recruiting despite the losses we sustained after the efforts to seize control of our party last June. And the YCL is also growing, and this is very good news. And despite the massive anti-communist campaign in the country around Ukraine, around China, and all the rest of it, we are getting more and more interest is being shown in our party and in our recruiting. So and we hope that this is going to continue and increase. So some specifics. We put our leaflet into the CLC convention, by the way, with 2,500 delegates, and was very well received there. We also helped put in a leaflet from the Canadian Peace Congress on the whole issue of labor and peace and disarmament, and it was also very well received. And we also helped the Canadian Network on Cuba put in a leaflet on the importance of solidarity with the struggling people of Cuba, removing the sanctions and the blockade, and the issue of the designation of the state sponsor of terrorism. So what this tells you is that workers are receptive. They're listening. Doesn't mean they're ready to join, but it does mean they understand these issues and the policies that we are advancing around them. A quick word about the party in Quebec. For many years, the party has not had official recognition as a provincial party in Quebec. This is a big job, as you probably know from when you went out many years ago, decades ago, to get registered as a political party in Alberta. Well, the Comrades in Quebec did it. A big campaign to get the signatures that they needed and to get the authorizations and all the rest of it. And they are now a registered party in Quebec. So this is a big step forward. And the party there is also growing and doing very well. About the YCL, they're going to hold their 30th convention in Montreal. I think it's on the Thanksgiving weekend. And we're very active in the Che Brigade to Cuba this year. And in the spring, it was very successful. They're also busy publishing Rebel Youth on a regular basis. And they're also growing. So people are invited to get subscriptions to Rebel Youth, even if they're not so much for themselves, but to pass them on to other young people and so forth. And I understand that the YCL is also growing in Alberta, and this is very welcome development as well. We found that the new dues system is working pretty well. People seem to like it. And we're also noticing that this has helped to make sure that dues are paid fairly regularly by party members across the country. So the feedback that we're getting is very good too. Spark, we could say the main thing about Spark is that, well, we really need to work on subscriptions and also on a more regular publication of Spark. The most recent issue was quite late, but it's out now. And if you're a Spark subscriber, you'll get it in the mail shortly. And if you're not, send in your subscription and you'll get you'll get the latest issue of Spark. Most important at this point is to announce that Comrade Dan Goldstick, who has been the editor of Spark since we first started publishing it almost 30 years ago, is stepping down. And the Central Committee thanked him for the enormous amount of work and energy and that he put into the publication of Spark. The new editor is going to be Comrade Jean McGuire, who some of you may know, who's a member of the CEC. And we're sure that Jean will do a great job. The next issue, which will be out probably in a month or two, will be a joint effort of the two editors, the outgoing editor and the incoming editor. And that will be, I don't know, you'll see something from Danny there with his comments about his years as the editor and Jean as the new editor. Finally, very finally, on People's Voice. So we had a good contribution at the Central Committee from our editor. The Dave McKee talked about the need to build up the subscription base, and most important, to fulfill the quotas that are still outstanding in some parts of the country. We know that this includes Alberta because you were very busy in the provincial election, but we're asking comrades to give this their attention over the summer as well, because we'll be raising money for the Central Party Fund, which is what keeps the lights on across the country. And finally, the quality of the paper was generally thought to be pretty good, and receives the reception to it is shown in the largest number of subscriptions and ads that were received during the for May Day from trade unions and mass organizations across the country. We haven't had that many ads and greetings for May Day for many, many years. So things are generally on the uptick across the country. Our party is making gains slowly but surely. We're growing, and I think we're on the right track, Carmage, and that's sort of the conclusion, I think, of the Central Committee here. Lots of work to do, some very urgent things on the table here. We're a small organization, and clearly we need to get bigger to be able to do, what's required of the Communist Party in the current period. We need a much bigger party. So recruiting remains front and center on the agenda, but with the keeping in mind the decisions of last year's Central Committee, that our door is not just open to anybody who walks in. Anybody who approaches us is a potential member or a potential friend of the party, or someone who's just checking us out because they're looking around the left. But we know that amongst those people who come to us, there will be people who, after we get to know them, we will find will make good members of our party. And also the push to be looking on always on the outlook when we're involved in the labor movement and the solidarity movements and the municipal movements, all those movements, for who are the best fighters, who are the people out there who are really swinging and who would be desirable, useful members of the Communist Party. Those are the people we need to be talking to as well about Marxism, about our policies, and about see if they're interested in communist politics, and if we can move things forward on those lines. So recruiting in two ways: people who come to us and people we want to bring to us. So on that note, Carmage, almost an hour speaking. We had so much that we talked about, as you will see. But I hope that there's time for questions and for discussion as well, to hear your views. So thank you for your for listening, and thank you, Carmage Chair.
Oh, thank you, Liz. So without more ado, I'll open the floor now for questions for either those who are in by Zoom or in the room here. Anybody have anything they want to say, ask, or say? Okay, other comrades who are on Zoom, anybody have a comment? Well, I don't know, Liz. I guess you've just said absolutely everything.
God, I hope not. Well, maybe you could tell us something about what you're doing in Alberta.
Okay, well, we're trying to follow through on some of what you talked about. This week we have plans to get out again with the rollback prices leaflet and collect some names on the petition. We've had pretty good results when we position ourselves outside grocery stores. We catch people on the way out, and very seldom do you get anybody who disagrees that there's a problem with prices. Not absolutely everybody will sign, but hardly anybody disagrees. So we also, we'll need to follow up on the fundraising and the subscriptions for People's Voice, as you said, because we sort of set that aside during the election period. So we know that we actually have to struggle here. Like historically, over several years, we found that although we made our party quota, we didn't actually make our People's Voice quota. So we realized that we have to shift more of our efforts into raising money for the paper, to make that quota, because it is very useful. And we also want to get to work to be more systematic in our use of the paper, of actually distributing the paper copies, the bundles that we receive, and getting maximum value from the use of the paper as well, politically, not just in terms of fundraising. And other than that, I'll say, well, quite a few comrades aren't here today because they're involved in other activities that, other commitments that they have, the Council of Canadians, with the Peace Council, several other events, it turns out, are going on today. So the fact that some people are not here is in fact a positive sign, because comrades are involved in activities and other organizations and mass movements, and they're taking their responsibilities seriously. So we have several of our Chilean comrades are here with us today. So, and they're doing good work too, that they're they're campaigning for in the 50th anniversary year of the coup. They
Right.
aim to try to get city council to agree to a statue, a memorial to Salvador Allende. Well, we haven't got to that stage yet, but they have got to the point where a city park is going to be renamed for the national flower, the symbol of Chile, right? In sort of recognition of the Chilean community in Canada. So there's going to be a big event this weekend, right? Celebrating that step.
22nd.
Oh, sorry, not this week, 22nd. So, work's going on here on various fronts.
How about recruiting? Had some success recruiting over the election one?
Yeah, well, it's a bit early to say how successful it is. We know at least a couple of people who've started coming around that that we met during the course of the election campaign. There's we have a few more names on the list. It's still a matter of time to see whether they will in fact turn into really committed members or allies for the party. But part of what we need to do is not drop the ball over the summer, like make sure we have regular activities, we have things to invite people to, so it's our intention to have our own educationals, our own social events, and more of the rollback prices activities, like to get out collecting signatures on the petition and handing out the leaflets, and try to keep that going over the summer, not to lapse, right? Not to put things off till the fall. So one of the things that we want to do, I think I'm going to take this up with the Education Commission as well, Liz, is I've mentioned this before, is that we need to have sort of educationals to supplement the rollback prices campaign, so that people can understand a Marxist analysis of economics, so that we can counter the theory that the bourgeois kind of theories that say, oh, but higher wages would just cause more inflation, or if you roll back prices, if you have price controls, that will just create shortages and so on. The old kind of bourgeois theory that it's supply and demand and market forces is, are these sort of overriding forces. So I think it's important for us to try to have more, to have educational, so that our comrades have a more thorough grounding in Marxist economic theory, and so that they're able to talk to other people as well, because I think there's lots of people out there who would sympathize with with this campaign, but they're actually taken in. I mean, they sincerely ask the question. They're not just being nasty or hostile when they say, yeah, but wouldn't price controls just create more shortages? It's a real concern, because they've really been taught that. And so I think we need more specific educational material and presentations to help address that. That'll help us in the long term too. I mean, it never hurts to have party members who are better trained and have a deeper understanding of economics and economic theory.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you that we spent 3 days of the school, 2 days of the school that we just came through in Georgian Bay on political economy. And of course, the big issue is inflation in the Canadian economy. What's going to happen? Mass unemployment, and the arguments put forward by the government and the corporations, etc., about why low wages and mass unemployment are a good thing for Canada. On the on the face of it, most people would say that sounds like a bad plan. And it is a bad plan. It's a terrible plan. And we need to attack it. So yeah, more educationals are a good idea. I agree with that. And I think some of them could be online so that people across the country can participate as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I see Morgan's got a hand up, so want to go ahead?
Hi, everyone. So I'm just here as a friend. I'm not, rushing to come back. Liz touched on the split last year, which was very stressful for, I think, the whole party and all of their friends and allies. I think that it's actually really good to hear that the CPC is actually rebuilding and also looking at what happened and how to do better. Because, I can just say that here in Calgary, I think I need counseling from just the stuff that we went through and the things that we saw. But, I'm still very involved with the Calgary Peace Council. I'm on the editorial board of International Manifesto Group now, and still, occasionally throwing an article to the Canada Files, which are all very involved on, the anti-capitalist approach to the international situation, whether it's anti-imperialism, decolonialism, or just simply, geopolitical economy, international economics, political economy. So we're all, I view all of these organizations as political allies, even though I'm involved. So, I mean, it's more than just political allies for me, but, you have a friend in me. So if you do have things that you'd like to build bridges on, if you have people who are interested, in doing more, there's always a contact. And I think that being said, we're with the Calgary Peace Council, we are, a little bit more radical than a lot of the country across the country. So we're really focusing on safety, and we're also focusing on tactics and trying to practice. We're like practicing, so it's really good. And also, just being very aware that there is a very artificial, massive lobby being established right now in Canada through the Ukrainian diaspora. These are not, different organizations are worse than others. For example, I believe it's the UCC, I don't know, and then the United Ukrainian Canadians that you guys, oh no, I'm getting them all mixed up, but you guys are kind of like the one where we have a lot of strong allies, but then there's the far right. And so they are currently doxing and showing up to speaking events, anti-war events of all kinds, especially with Dimitri Lascaris finishing up his cross-country tour, which we've had a great opportunity to observe and learn from, and just to know what to expect at anti-war rallies. And so really, where Canada's in a very precarious position where things are shifting very rapidly internationally. The Minister of Defense for the Russian Federation issued a new red line about a month ago, just maybe about 3 weeks ago, saying that if artillery provided by US or Britain strikes Crimea, that will then trigger Russia to consider US and Britain co-belligerents in the war, which will trigger NATO and will trigger Canada to join the war too. And this is it's so close to happening that it could just be an oopsie, And so really what happens in the past when Canada goes to war, it's usually reactionary wars. It's the anti-war movement that is criminalized. It's the fascist forces that are bolstered, protected, having lobbies established. And it's usually Marxist, communist, or leftist forces who are really attacked, tossed in jail, smeared, and all of these sorts of things. So it's just good to be cognizant that we should be ready and to be prepared and to at least be a little bit practiced and watching very closely. For example, there was a case in the United States where some Black nationalists and some socialist organizations were charged by the DOJ, and these charges were trumped up. Although many of them, I think there was, I don't know off the top of my head, there might have been 16 counts, might have been like one or two that were kind of could be sticky, but like it depends on, whether or not we want to look at, whether we agree with the sanctions and the war in general, that the reactionary laws that have made some of these peace organizing actions illegal in the eyes of the USA. And so US, Britain, UK, and Canada, Australia are all very similar in their approach to cracking down on peace activism. So, we have to be very vigilant and tread organized and very tactfully. So I guess that's just my update from Calgary. I wish there was more Calgary people to say hi to, but yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, perhaps I could say a word about that. If I may, Chair.
Mhm. Yeah, go ahead.
I think, what is urgent in the war in Ukraine is a ceasefire and a political solution, withdrawal of all foreign troops, including NATO, and a political talks to a political solution. That's how you end wars, not by, sending in more military, more troops, more weapons. And so China and Russia were calling for exactly that recently. And the kibosh was put to it by the Biden administration, who said this is not the time for peace talks and a peace solution. And what they are aiming for, they say, is for the Ukrainians and all of the military forces that are there illegally, the international volunteers, etc. They need to move on to the offensive, take a lot of land back, and be in a strong position, quote unquote, before that there should be any talks about peace. So this means that the war will continue, and given the cluster bombs that are going to be sent, it's going to get a lot worse. A lot more people are going to die. And NATO, of course, we know, is quite prepared to fight right down to the last Ukrainian. They don't care about Ukraine or Ukrainians. This is for them. This is a part of their overall aim of of attacking the real enemy, which is Russia and China. And why do they want to do that? Because they want the resources in Russia. And furthermore, they want the political, they want to expand their political hegemony. That's what this is really all about. And our Freeland said as much a year ago in her budget when she said, why do we have to do this? Why are we supporting Ukraine? Because they're fighting our enemy, which is Russia. And that didn't get too much publicity at the time, because a lot of people would have said, what are we doing? Who are we at war with? It's an undeclared war against Russia. So anyway, I think that the key thing here is a political solution, and we need to build up the peace movement in the country that will make that the key demand. There needs to be a political solution, a ceasefire, withdrawal of all foreign troops. NATO should butt out. And, we should avoid a more generalized war in Europe, which looks like is actually developing now. And of course, the increasingly likely prospect of an oopsie nuclear war. And that will affect everybody. We worry, by the way, about the smoke from fires in Western Canada and on the prairies in Northern Ontario. We had the worst you know, unbreathable air here in Toronto a few days ago. It was, you could actually feel it in your throat, and, you know, the kinds of things that we've heard have sometimes happened in other places. But we should also be choking on the dust of war, which is not so easy to address either. Anyway, requires a big movement. And this is one of the things we've been talking about both in the Central Committee, at the school last week, and so forth. And that is, how do we convince people of the need to speak up, to come out and march and go to demonstrations and, you know, bug their MPs and so on. And we saw, you know, 30 years ago, there were massive protests, thousands of people in the streets, hundreds of thousands. And even in Canada, Montreal, I think, had the biggest protests. And that's on the basis that people understand what is the main issue, what's the main demand. And so I think, you know, one of the Peace Congress and its councils play a very important role in terms of, you know, putting that out there. What is the cause of the war? Well, who's behind it? What should we be doing about it? But we're not the only ones. The Communist Party is not the only ones. The Peace Congress isn't the only ones. I can remember during the 1980s, the big coalitions against war, and they included the churches, other religious organizations, the student movement, women's organizations, trade unions. So I think we have to be looking at all of these things. How are we going to spur them to take some action? People generally, I think, are still confused, and it's because there is a propaganda war in this country that just you cannot think other than support for Ukraine. And you know, this is what people need to understand. This war is going to, and military spending that goes with it, is going to see a sharp decline in living standards, in jobs, in social programs, etc. And most important, threatens a much bigger war that would involve Canada, not just as an exporter of weapons and passer of, you know, support for this war, but our kids will be recruited to go to war in Europe, and our living standards will decline sharply. So we have to start thinking about that. This is really important. And that's what will, at the end of the day, stop them, is a massive public opposition and visible mobilizations against war. And if we can link it also to the whole issue of, you know, planetary survival means an end to war, and it also means an end to environmental degradation. They do go together, because war is environmental degradation in a big way. So.
I'll just jump in and point out page 6 of the latest issue of People's Voice's article on the situation in Ukraine. It's really good. I think it gives like a strategic overview, not just what's the, you know, military situation right now, but how did we get here? And I think it's, you know, anybody who hasn't read People's Voice yet, this issue really good. So,
Get a subscription.
yes, anyone who doesn't have a subscription should be getting one, because it's just full of really, really helpful stuff like that in every issue. So, okay. Anybody else? Okay, all right. I think normally we would like to carry on, you know, longer and deeper, but I think we want to go support our Palestinian brothers and sisters. So I think at this point we'll say thank you very much, Liz, for a very useful, very insightful presentation. I think I speak for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, that even having been at the meeting, I still learned something more today as well. And so I thank you. We'll be talking again soon, and, you know, with you and, you know, with everyone else here. So
Yeah.
once again, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, comrades. And we'll see our Chilean comrades on September 11th. We'll be there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye,
So-
everyone.
Bye,
Okay,
Comrade
All
Mayor.
right, so we'll cut it short here. We'll be talking again. Thanks again for those who joined us from outside of Edmonton. Thanks. Okay.
Then,
Oh, okay. Let's see if I can.
I know, but do you wanna work on, are you going to Palestinian now?
well, we're going over that now.
Yeah.
Test it.
You want to work on the
Well,
projector, right? Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, I
so,
didn't know
so
that.
some of you still have to, a couple of you still have to stay here and deal with that, is that right?
Mhm.
Or you're gonna come back for it later?
No, it's okay. It's too late right now.
Mhm.
Too late for what?
We test it.
Oh, okay, I see.
See if I can-
If you have time, what I did was take a laptop, plug it into the wall.
Oh,
You should, that's-
sorry.